Hello everyone, and welcome to A Teacher Explains.
For a very long time, the prevailing idea was that mass media could essentially mold public opinion like a sculptor works with clay. But what if that whole assumption was wrong? In this explainer, we're going to trace the fascinating story of how our understanding shifted, moving away from the belief in an all-powerful media to a much more nuanced discovery of its limited and complex effects. So, here's our roadmap. We'll start with that old belief in a powerful media. Then we'll witness the scientific revolution that began to challenge it. From there, we'll meet the concept of the active audience, which completely reshaped the field. Then we'll explore the limited effects theories that emerged. And finally, we'll look at the new models that helped us visualize this new, more complex reality. At the heart of this entire narrative is a fundamental paradigm shift. The initial thought was pretty simple. Media messages were like a giant megaphone, broadcasting directly and uniformly to a passive crowd. But rigorous research uncovered a far more intricate reality, one where influence is often indirect, mediated by social factors, and where the audience isn't just listening, it's actively filtering and interpreting. This contrast is the key to everything we're about to discuss. So let's rewind and start at the very beginning with that first dominant assumption, the idea that the media held an almost unquestionable power over the public mind. Early on, the dominant theory was often called the hypodermic needle model. The name itself is so vivid, right? The idea was that media messages were essentially injected directly into the minds of a passive public who would then accept them without question. It was a very compelling, very straightforward idea, but it was built almost entirely on assumption, not on evidence, and it was about to be seriously challenged. And that challenge came in the form of what we now call the empirical revolution. This is the moment researchers decided to stop just speculating and start actually measuring, using scientific methods to find out what was really going on. One of the pioneers leading this charge was Paul Lazarsfeld. His team conducted these massive, large-scale surveys on voting behavior, fully expecting to find the media's powerful influence at work. But what they found was stunning. It was the exact opposite. It turned out that people's social circles, their family, friends, and community groups were far more influential than the media. Media wasn't changing minds. It was mainly reinforcing decisions that had already been made. This was a radical finding. Media's primary role wasn't conversion, it was reinforcement. At the same time, Hovland was running controlled experiments with army training films, and his findings were just as profound. He discovered that the films were fantastic at teaching soldiers facts. They absolutely increased their knowledge, but they almost never changed their underlying attitudes. This proved a critically important point. You can give someone information without actually changing how they feel. Persuasion, it turned out, was a much more complex psychological process than anyone had assumed. So, if the media wasn't directly converting people or changing their core attitudes, a new, massive question emerged. Why not? The answer, researchers began to realize, wasn't in the media message itself, but in the mind of the person receiving it. This led to a major psychological turn and the discovery of the active audience. A key concept here is something called cognitive dissonance. It's that deeply uncomfortable mental state you experience when a new piece of information clashes with one of your core beliefs. To resolve that discomfort, our brains have a powerful defense mechanism. We are motivated to either ignore the challenging information or twist it to fit what we already think. This shows our minds aren't just passive sponges, they're active gatekeepers of our own belief systems. Now, this mental gatekeeping works through three primary filters. First, there's selective exposure. We tend to seek out media that tells us we're right. Second, there's selective retention. We're just much better at remembering information that confirms our existing views. And third, selective perception. We can hear the exact same message as someone else but interpret it in a completely different way to make it fit our worldview. When you put all three of these filters together, it proves the audience isn't a passive target at all. It's an active and sometimes very stubborn co-creator of meaning. All of these empirical findings and psychological insights started to converge, pointing in the same direction and eventually building a powerful new paradigm, the limited effects perspective. One of the cornerstone theories from this new paradigm is the two-step-flow model. It argues that media influence is rarely direct. Instead, media messages first reach opinion leaders. These are the informed, engaged people in our communities who pay close attention. Then, in the second step, they interpret and pass on that information to others through their personal social circles. This means that influence is deeply personal and social, not just a broadcast from some faraway source. This entire body of work was famously synthesized by a researcher named Joseph Klapper. His reinforcement theory basically argued that the primary effect of mass media is not to cause change, but to strengthen what's already there. Conversion is the rare exception, reinforcement is the norm. Now, this is a crucial point. Limited effects does not mean no effects. Reinforcement is still a very powerful form of influence. So, to make sense of the media's role in this new limited framework, many scholars adopted a theory called functionalism. It asks you to picture society as a living body, where each institution, like the government, education, and the media, acts like an organ with a specific job to do to keep the entire system healthy and stable. In this view, media is just one of those crucial organs. From this functionalist perspective, theorists identified 4 key jobs or functions that the media perform. First is surveillance, basically acting as society's watchdog and telling us what's happening. Second is correlation, helping us interpret and make sense of the news. Third is the transmission of social heritage, passing our values and culture on to the next generation. And finally, entertainment, giving us a necessary outlet for relaxation and escape. As you can imagine, this new, much more complex understanding of the media meant that the old, simple diagrams of communication just didn't work anymore. It was time for new models that could visualize this new dynamic reality. The old model, often called the transmissional model, was very simple and linear. It really boiled down to one question: who says what, in which channel, to whom, with what effect? The really important thing to notice here is the core assumption that communication is a one-way street where a powerful source does something to a passive receiver. The difference between the old and new thinking is really night and day. The old transmissional model saw the process as linear and one way, with a passive audience and no real room for feedback. The new systems model, on the other hand, sees communication as circular and interactive, with an active audience whose feedback is an absolutely essential part of the process. And this systems model was a true game changer. It sees communication not as a simple transmission, but as an interactive, ongoing process. All parts of the system, the sender, the message, the receiver, are interdependent. The audience provides feedback that in turn influences the source. It's a dynamic loop, not a straight line. So let's just quickly recap this incredible journey. We moved from speculative ideas about all-powerful media to empirical data showing limited mediated effects. The concept of a passive audience was replaced by an active, thinking participant, and our very models of communication evolved from simple one-way arrows to complex, interactive systems. It was nothing less than a complete transformation in how we study communication. All of which leaves us with a critical and very timely question for today. In our world of micro-targeted advertising and algorithmic filter bubbles, are the days of limited effects over? Have we, perhaps, circled back to a new, more subtle, and maybe even more powerful form of media influence? It's certainly something to think about. The research we've explored today is drawn from several foundational texts in communication theory, which we've listed here for you if you'd like to dive deeper into the topic.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel.